As God had promised, after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonian army, after Israel had been carried away into Babylon for a generation, and after Babylon herself was destroyed by Persia, a remnant was returned to Israel to rebuild the city. This is where we find a smallish band of Israelites under the leadership of the prophet Nehemiah in chapter 9 of his book. But Israel was surrounded by enemies who had long memories of how Israel had attacked and defeated their own nations and who were historical enemies of the Jews. Syrians to the north, Ammonites to the east, and Arabs to the south. When the Jews returned, these nations were there and they were not happy. The Jews came back under the authority of Artaxerxes, the supreme leader of the Persian Empire. The enemies of Israel had no authority to interfere militarily. Instead, they tried to dissuade the Jews from their building project by demoralizing them. Feeble Jews, do they think they can do this on their own? Will their God swoop down and do it for them? Do they think they can throw this together in a day? Are they going to rebuild this from the rubbish heap of burnt stones left by the Babylonians? If a fox crawls over their wall, it'll fall down. But this is not Israel's work. It isn't Nehemiah's work. Nehemiah is an instrument. This is God's work, and we mustn't let the taunts of enemies overcome it. But rather than taking vengeance ourselves, we look to the righteous God, the only one in whose hand vengeance is just, and we ask him to mete out justice to the enemy. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and do not let their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. As Christians, we must wrestle a little with this prayer. It's a call for the plunder of our enemy. Since we've learned from Jesus to love our enemies and to pray for them, not to curse them, but to bless them. And it would be far too easy to ask God to rain down fire on their heads, even though it might make us feel way too happy if he did. So we're left to wrestle with feelings of injustice, asking the Lord to be just. After all, justice is justice, and it's one of God's finest character traits. But at the same time, as we've grown in the Lord, we have learned to seek the best outcome for our enemies. That would mean that our enemies would come to see the grace and kindness of God rather than hate him and us. Finally, while the Jews of the Old Testament were fighting physical wars against armies with spears and swords, our warfare as children of God is not of that sort. The Apostle Paul said, "For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. And, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." Now God's battles, our battles, are fought in the field of ideas, not on the field of bloodshed. As mature children of God, we go through this development of learning the justice of an eye for an eye, and then grow into turn the other cheek also. But we never forget the former message in favor of the latter one. Is there a time to ask for our enemies to be plundered and their purpose defeated? I think so, but we sin if we do not properly balance those sentiments against the disposition of truly caring for the welfare of those who are against us. Bible writers led us through that entire development. Righteous feelings of anger, mistreatment, or unfairness are true and even noble, and yet these feelings must be tempered with empathy, kindness, long-suffering, and compassion. This is a call to maturity, to be able to feel indignation against the enemies of God while maintaining our own integrity of heart.